Hello and welcome back to the Missing Sock for Kingdom 1000. Today it's a very windy day and we hope that there are no gremlins sailing on the wind here to disturb us today. And you're hoping that the sound isn't too disturbing either. But really looking forward to today's episode. We have someone very special to join us and some stories for you. Before we go too far, I would like to kind of give a part two to the announcement that we gave at the start of last week's episode. We were asking for anyone to help us out with captions for the hard of hearing and subtitles as well for anyone who wants to go through these videos in different languages. And we're really pleased to say that not only have we had some fantastic volunteers come forward to look at the captions and some brilliant volunteers coming forward to look at translating into Spanish and German and a few other languages as well, but we've also managed to find a brilliant service for anyone who wants to help out in this way. It's called amara.org. It's kind of like a community captioning, subtitling destination. If you go there and create yourself an account, it's completely free. Type in Kingdom 1000, you will find all of our videos there and you'll be able to help out either with the captions or with the subtitles. If you make a start and you don't finish, then someone else can come along and maybe do a little bit of extra to what you've put in there. It's really useful. And as soon as they're finished, we'll be able to put them live here on Vimeo for anyone who is hard of hearing or watching from a different country. So thank you ever so much to the folks at Amara for helping out with that. Thanks ever so much to all of our volunteers who've come forward so far. That really is making Kingdom 1000, this celebration of equality, even more equal inherently. So that's absolutely wonderful. Right, let's kick off with today's show.
Different words describe different people. But in the eyes of the law, there's one that fits us all. Human right number 7. We're all equal before the law. What are human rights? Find out at youthforhumanrights.org.
To Kingdom 1000, where once again we are going to be exploring the world that gave birth to the first and most influential law of equal justice here in the Western world. The Proclamation of 1020 that you got to see if you were watching last week's episode, issued by King Canute, currently preserved in a massive Bible and several other documents up in York Minster. And there it was, saying that justice should be there for everyone on the island of Britain, no matter what race they were, no matter what social class they were either. So it was a start. Obviously, we've come a long way in those 1,000 years. And as we discussed with Mary, we've still got some way to go. But while we are here at that 1,000 year milestone, we are going to celebrate with some incredible artists who do amazing work. One of whom I'm really pleased to say is here with me right now. I've got a few extra buttons in front of me today. So bear with me while I find the right one to press. I'm hoping this one is going to give me Sally. Yay, there she is. Say hi, Sally.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Sally King.
Brilliant. So the microphone is working too. So tell us a little bit about what you do then, Sally.
Yeah, well, I'm an illustrator and an artist, so I do a lot of work with drawings, paintings, and also sometimes it jumps out of the page and comes into 3 dimensions as well. So quite often we'll bring a little bit of, theatre into the work that I do. So So
Oh, wow. That wasn't in your bio, so I'm learning stuff already.
Yeah, it's hard to write it all down because it changes all the time. So
Excellent. Well, I did enjoy reading about everything that you've done, and there are loads of questions I want to ask about it, which we will come to when we get to that part of the show. Okay. Let's kick off right now, though, with the real hard question. What does equality mean for you?
Wow. It's about having freedom, I think, isn't it? It feels to me like underneath all equality comes freedom. So the freedom to choose, to do what you want to do, is right at the heart of that idea of equality, I think. And you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually. I don't think that's been made quite so strongly in all of the episodes yet, because we've talked a lot about equality opening up opportunities to lots of different groups. But obviously, yeah, if you're opening up opportunities, you are also providing more freedom and giving more power to the people, I guess. That's a fantastic way of describing it.
I think it's one of the things I find really important, and I think if you want to encourage people to be their true selves, then that's where it's got to come from.
Yeah.
And
that's very important for art as well, isn't it? Because that's the main way of expressing your true self.
Oh, completely. Yeah, and whatever that is, and it's a constantly changing process, isn't it? There's no sort of one thing at any given time. So having that freedom to trust in a process rather than be defined by an identity that might not be relevant anymore is really important from an artistic point of view, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that leads really, really nicely into our story for today as well, which is all about trust. We have in this story one of the kings who is often described as the first king of England, not because England actually existed in his time, but because he managed at one point to be king of every single kingdom that covered the island of Britain. His story, though, is one of trust in several different directions, and whether or not he is a man that we can be proud of, we will leave you to judge by the time we get to the end of the story. This is the story of Ethelstan.
When the Romans left the island of Britain in the 5th century, many peoples arrived to take their place. The Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, and the Danish. They set up kingdoms in different parts of the island. And their kings and their peoples were almost always fighting to try and show who was the best. Eventually, it looked like the Danish were going to subdue every single one of the kingdoms on the island, until a rather clever Saxon down in the kingdom of Wessex came up with the idea of uniting the Saxons and the Angles, and they were able to beat the Danish all the way back to the east and the north. After that day, the Angles and the Saxons became known together as the English. And eventually, Alfred's grandson, a man called Ethelstan, had the idea of ruling the Danish as well. He managed to lead an army all the way up to the northernmost kingdom of Northumbria. But he didn't stop there. He kept going into the land of the painted people, so called because they would decorate their faces with paint before going into battle. After he had defeated them, Ethelstan was able to call himself Overlord of Britain. But the painted people didn't like that very much. They were determined to get their land back. So they joined forces with some Vikings and led their army back down towards Northumbria to take it back for the Danish. When this news eventually reached Ethelstan at his home in West Mercia, he was in no rush to go and fight them. He was so confident that he would be able to beat their army that he took his time, mustering up his forces and then leading them up the west coast of Britain to fight in the land that we now call Scotland. As they travelled, though, Ethelstan overheard many of his soldiers saying things like, "There are rumours that the Irish have joined them to help. There's so many of them, we're going to be completely outnumbered." "Yeah, I know. I reckon we're doomed. We don't stand a chance." Well, when Ethelstan heard them, he kind of knew that they were right. He'd heard the reports as well, and he knew it was genuine. The Irish really had come to help the Painted People and some of the Danish to recapture Northumbria. So, in that moment, Ethelstan made a decision. He turned to his commander and said, "Change of plan! We are going to head first to Beverley." But, Your Grace," said the commander, "Beverley's all the way over on the east coast." "I know," replied Ethelstan, "but we must go there first." Of course, by the time Ethelstan's force arrived in Beverley, well, they were even more hungry and tired and fed up. But still, Ethelstan didn't let them go to bed. He took them first to the church in Beverley, where there were pictures of St. John. And Ethelstan said to them, "Men, pray to St. John before you turn to your beds for the night. Because St. John was a friend of St. Bede, who inspired my grandfather Alfred to unite the Angles and the Saxons and create the English people. So pray to St. John, and you will be guaranteed victory in the battle ahead." Ethelstan left his soldiers praying in the church, and he also made sure the monks who looked after that church received huge gifts of gold in honour of St. John. Even so, when Ethelstan found his own bed for that night, he couldn't sleep for worrying about whether they really were going to succeed in the battle against the Painted People and the Vikings. As he lay there, there suddenly appeared a bright white light in front of him, whiter than any moonlight, and there, within the light, there was the figure of a man. And as Ethelstan looked in shock at this man who seemed to be floating before him, the man said, "Ethelstan, why do you worry? You know I am with you. You have victory assured." And as he heard those words, Ethelstan recognized the face before him. It was the same face he'd seen on all those pictures around the church. It was the face of St. John. And sure enough, when Ethelstan led his men to Brannanburn to finally face the Painted People and those Vikings, well, they certainly were victorious. And storytellers say that the Battle of Brannanburn was the largest battle the island of Britain had ever seen. But Ethelstan emerged as overlord of all Britain yet again. And you'd think that with a saint like John on his side, he would be a wise and respected king. Someone to unite all of the kingdoms around Britain in an era of peace. However, down in Wessex, the original kingdom ruled by his grandfather Alfred, some of the nobles there had rather hoped that Ethelstan wouldn't be king. They much preferred one of Ethelstan's brothers, a prince called Edwin. However, when they saw Ethelstan beat the Painted People and the Vikings at Brannanburn, and they saw that once again he had managed to rule every single kingdom across the island of Britain, they decided maybe they ought to change sides. Maybe Ethelstan would be the one they should pledge allegiance to. The thing was, Ethelstan would know that they had supported his brother Edwin. They needed a way to convince Ethelstan that actually now they wanted to be on his side. And so these nobles went to Ethelstan at the next available opportunity and said to him, "Psst, Ethelstan, your brother Edwin, he's out to get you. He's trying to get some soldiers together to pluck your eyes out in your sleep because he knows that a blind man can't be king." Now, with someone like St. John on his side, do you think Ethelstan is going to believe some rumours being touted around by a few nobles who he hardly even knows? Well, the thing is, he kinda did. As soon as he heard these rumours, Ethelstan was furious. He commanded his men to arrest Edwin and put him in a boat with no food or water, no oars, and no sail. And they were preparing to push that boat out to sea. One of Edwin's friends came to beg Ethelstan for his friend's life. He got down onto his knees and he tried to make Ethelstan see that actually this was just a story that the nobles had made up. But Ethelstan was full of so much rage that he put that friend in the boat as well. And both that friend and Edwin were pushed out to sea. The books tell us that that boat very soon sank beneath the water, and Edwin and his friend were never heard of again. So yes, Ethelstan was a mighty king who ruled every single kingdom on the island of Britain. But he was also a jealous man, with a very short temper, quick to anger. Do you think St. John would have been happy with that? Maybe that's the reason why, soon after Ethelstan died, his kingdoms on the island of Britain soon fell apart and were once again ruled by different kings. In fact, it would not be until about 60 years later that they would be finally united once and for all, and it would probably upset Ethelstan even greater to know that this was achieved by a prince who came from one of the peoples who were the sworn enemies of Ethelstan, the Danish.
So there you are. That was the story of Ethelstan. Very trusting of saintly visions, but not, well, also, I suppose, very trusting of his advisors, not so trusting of his family. Ethelstan, like I said, was really essential to the journey towards Canute's proclamation because he was the first king who took Alfred's idea of the Angles and the Saxons being united under the banner of the English and tried to make every single kingdom across Britain ruled by the English. But it is important to say he didn't get as far as solidifying them all and calling them England or anything, really. He just accepted the responsibility of being overlord of all these different kingdoms. I guess it made him feel big, probably, being the ruler of all of those different kingdoms. What did you think of the story, Sally?
I like it because it goes into those familial relationships. So, you know, it's like a soap opera, isn't it? In a way, and that makes it much more relatable. I think that it's easier to get into some kind of empathetic position, really, with everyone, because they're talking about what would you do if you were faced, and to come up with his solution, which was to send his brother and his mate out in the boat to die.
Yep.
It shows you the difference really between then and now, possibly.
Possibly. I mean, I have thought about doing that to some of my brothers and sisters at various points. But I suppose it does show the difference in power, because there was a time when if a king wanted to do that, he could. And sometimes you do act on impulse, don't you? And with hindsight, maybe he did change his mind. If he'd been a bit slower about it, maybe he wouldn't have rushed into that decision or done a bit more investigating. But you're absolutely right. I think it's a clear is one of those clear morals about knowing everything. No one person does know everything, and you can never know all the sides to the story. Certainly not if you're as impatient as Ethelstan was there. And I guess again that links very much into the sort of stuff that you do, because when you produce art, you're capturing a moment in time there, aren't you? And people come to it and they can bring whatever they're going through to the symbols that you create.
Yeah, it's really true. And you know, you have to let go of the control once you finish, and it's really hard to finish a piece as well, because you know that's a whole other conversation for a different time. But there's a process that goes on in between person looking at the pictures or the art and the creation, and it's somewhere in that space is where something happens, isn't it? But it's all negotiated.
So I guess what a lot of people will be thinking now is, when you actually start, do you have an intended message or something that you want your what do you call them, audience or viewers or
Good question.
Subjects?
Subject. Love it. Yes, I am a king after all. It's hard to think where the inspiration comes from, and I would say most of the time it's inspiration. So you are sort of listening. I use dreams and memories and sort of little flashes as my starting point quite often, or just things that I see that move me to take a photo, and then I'll bring it back and start working around that, or you know, a memory of a song or something that somebody said. So that, you know, there's all these different ways that inspiration happens that seem a bit kind of weird if you're not used to that. But when you start talking to other artists, you realize everyone's got some very unique processes going on.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, art inspires art, doesn't it? Especially when you think of it like that, capturing of the essence of a moment. And that, of course, is one of the things that we are here to do. If you are watching this and you would like to pose your questions to Sally, we'll have a live Q&A at the end of this program, which you can join either through worldstorytellingcafe.com or kingdom1000.com. If you are watching through either of those sites, just click Join Story and you will come in here into our room on Zoom, and you'll be able to type your questions into the chat feed. We'll be able to see them there, and any of those questions we will pose to Sally at the very end. If you are watching on Facebook or YouTube or Vimeo or any of the other places where you are, great to see you there. But if you want to join our Q&A, please do come in to the Zoom room through kingdom1000.com or worldstorytellingcafe.com. It'll be wonderful to have you here. Since I've got you all to myself for a little while, Sally, I would like to, well, like I said, there is a particular project that I know you've done that I want to quiz you about. But before I go into that, I'm going to restrain myself a little and ask you if there is any particular impact you feel that equality has had on, well, your life as well as your work. But whether that it's been there as something that has inspired you or something that has enabled you in any way.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, you know, particularly in the backdrop of the current situation in terms of school and and the exams. I think, that there's certainly, that raises lots of questions at the moment around accessing higher education. And I know, I was really lucky. I think when I went to university, I got grant funding from the EU to go abroad.
Wow.
Things like that really helped me to do things I probably wouldn't have been able to afford to do at the time, because back in the 90s, my dad was working on a farm. He got made redundant. So, when I turned 18, there was no money, in the family to help me. I had to work 30 hours a week all through college. So, that I was lucky to get a job as well. Really lucky, because you think nowadays, young people are really, competing to find those sorts of jobs that pay reasonable money. There's a lot of competition. So, I think, looking back, I was fortunate that there was, funding available for people like me to do things that enabled me to further my career, and that was really lucky. And then I'm not sure if that will continue. I hope so. I hope there'll be other pots of money available for people through no fault of their own who have got talents they want to develop, but probably would be put off by it now. And I think, hopefully with the changes around COVID and people doing more of this sort of thing where we're working online, once you've got that set up, hopefully that could enable more people to do more studying. And
Absolutely.
That's quite exciting, really, that you've got access to thinkers and discussions and conversations like this, that the comfort of your own sitting room. So that's hopefully something, so there's something about technology, isn't there, and equality there, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And again, I can see why you related equality to freedom earlier, because again, thinking about how it's impacted your life, it's very much about equal opportunities, isn't it? And I've seen so much evidence of that myself, as well as an artist and a creator. Even being here right now, able to put on this web series here in the Missing Sock, it's all, and the World Storytelling Café. I mean, it's all because of wonderful people who are kind of sharing the wealth, literally, financially, as well as creatively. You'll see at the end in the credits here, this project was able to continue throughout the COVID-19 crisis because of Arts Council England funding. So we're very grateful to them. And again, they try to make sure that they are as equal as possible. So it is so important. And I suppose the great thing about organizations like the Arts Council, which are national, the EU, which was multinational, was that, yes, they are able to facilitate that sharing of culture as well as of funds. And it's invaluable, isn't it? Have you had any sort of major cultural impacts on the actual work that you've produced?
Well, that's hard to say. I suppose it's a lot of the work that I produce is quite multicultural in that sense, because I live in London, and I work with people that live in London as well. So it's got a very multicultural flavour. So some of the work that I do is definitely directed toward people from different audiences, I would say, or from different cultural backgrounds that I grew up in, which is always really interesting, I think. And what's nice about it's just starting to pour down with rain here, so if you get the background noise. But when using things like Instagram and all these sites where you get people communicating from across the world, and that's very exciting, because you just really don't realise what resonates with somebody, particularly when it's something personal about my work comes from, very much from my sense of place, being a Kentish girl, and I work with landscape a lot, so it's really interesting to see how that will resonate for someone in, say, Carolina, one of the Carolinas, or just that's thinking of off the top of my head. There's so many connections.
And again, those connections don't end, do they? Because when new people come to see your work, again, it could be cross time. It could be 200 or 300 years in the future. Someone is looking at your work and interpreting it in a completely different way. Especially since I know some of your work does draw inspiration from the past. So you are literally connecting past, present, and future. Do you have any images there of?
I've got a few bits that I'm working on at the moment. I'm illustrating a book, and I don't know if you can see it. It's very. I'm going left to right to left.
Hang on, let me make you bigger again. There we go.
So this is a very delicate piece that I'm working on, where I'm just illustrating.
Oh wow.
The Houses of Parliament. Obviously, this is all covered up with a tarpaulin at the moment because they're doing Big Ben up. But that you can see that's. I'm trying not to touch it because it's a bit blurry and undefined at the moment. But again, quite that ethereal quality, which is about the mix up of memory and truth and reality, which is what I'm interested in. That almost nostalgia. I think that to me is a really interesting area, and all these tales that you're talking about from 1,000 years ago and before, obviously, because they would have passed up. I think that tradition really speaks to me in my work. So that was just a sort of very current piecework that I'm working on at the moment. This is one that I've just finished actually, which is much more sort of real, which was a portrait. So you can see it's like very personal. I'm trying to put it in the middle and try and keep my hands. But I'm sort of interested in animals very much, and family, and the interrelationship between humans and animals as well. I think that to me is really interesting, particularly thinking about all the white horses on chalk downs, and just wondering if we've really lost one of those connections. So that would be a dream come true, to do a chalk figure. That would be, it's on my wish list. Do
you do sculpture as well then?
Well, as I say, it's sometimes the inspiration takes hold, and so I wouldn't call myself a sculptor, because quite often I'll use like very lo-fi materials, like paper mache, or so it's not classical or high art of any kind, but that's what makes it more interesting, is that it's very accessible. And I think when we're talking about equality as well, with ideas about art and what's serious and what's not serious, then I quite like to use those kind of materials just to question those ideas and thoughts, because I think there's a real class conversation there too. So I'm always questioning those sorts of things in the work that I'm producing, and I like to use things that don't cost a lot.
I'm glad you've mentioned that, because I'm sure there are going to be people watching this who are maybe thinking, oh yeah, I could draw some pictures to show my feelings about equality, or my feelings about dreams and memory, exactly. And then you put your image up and they'll go, oh no, okay, I can't do that. But really, for one thing, it is a talent that you have to hone, isn't it? What you've done, I'm sure, is work on the skills that you have with dedication. But paper mache is something that that I remember doing in school. It's really easy, and I'm terrible at sculpture or drawing of all kind. There's a reason why I picked the storytelling medium.
I think a lot of people have that idea about themselves that they're not artists because they can't draw and they can't create likenesses, that are like photographs, and all those ideas about classical or academic art, and not being good enough. And to me, anything to do with elite, or I'd take the word elite out of the dictionary if I could, because I just think it's so limiting, and it's stopping people from progressing who don't even know what they can produce. And it certainly it held me back for a long time, because there's always going to be someone who's better than you, always. Now it's going to be algorithms, isn't it, that are creating more perfect art.
I hope not. But you're absolutely right, though. I mean, even letters are works of art in themselves. They're symbols. They stand for something else. And if you use a handprint, and they do this a lot in schools, don't they? They one of the first bits of art that any child produces is a hand smothered in paint and then smacked down on a surface. And it's just a way of saying, this represents something. And if you can bring art back to that idea that this is just an expression of self, it's an expression of an idea, then that instantly opens it up and makes it accessible to all, I think.
I think I was laughing when you said that, because I'm part of an artist collective as well called Present Imperfect, where we really explore the ideas that we've just been talking about there is no ideal. And everything's constructed, in the moment. So, and one of my artist friends in that group is a guy called Alistair, who's very interesting, and he's doing a project which is around letters that don't want to become words. Yes. So, I'm very interested in realist poetry. And, there's just no limit, really, once you start getting under the skin of things, about the level of creativity you can bring to any situation. So that always blows my mind when I meet him and ask him what he's been up to.
I'm sure John, who was with us a couple of weeks ago, would want to find out more about that. Is it like just the letters put in completely random orders, or? Well,
this is it. He's creating some games around it, so that before we went into lockdown, I'll just tell you the backstory. Sorry, we were just about to hold a group, a collective artist residency at the Institute of Psychotherapists in London, or the Guild of Psychotherapists. Sorry, and. That was one of the ideas that we had, was that if you can get everyone sat around a table and feeling comfortable and make it very sort of safe and easy to deal with, then that could create a nice place where people would just start creating and not have any expectations of themselves. And then produce some sort of outcome. And what we were going to do was invite people to come in and have a look, sit down, draw on the tablecloth, or do whatever they like. And one of the ideas would be that we could make, I think, paper aeroplanes with letters on, and then just fly them in the air, and then make some poetry out of the letters that land together. So, these are all real exercises, I suppose, in just letting go of the control and having to have, a particular idea of how things are going to turn out, but just let go of that and let the freedom be the guide. So it's a bit crazy and out there for lots of people, but that's really, I think, what was exciting for the psychotherapists.
Yeah, I bet.
Probably get very stuck sometimes. I don't know how they do it, but
and it's capturing that essence that must be natural in all of us, because we all start as children, and we all do that, don't we? We just take things and muck about with them and see where they land. I remember one of the first stories I ever wrote. I was about 3 when I wrote it. And it was literally the word "the," then loads of squiggles. I think there was a picture of a fish at one point, and then a few more squiggles. And it was quite clearly a story because it had punctuation and everything. It was divided up into paragraphs. There were full stops and there was a capital T or capital squiggle.
Yeah.
So, I'd clearly seen books, the books that my parents used to read me, that they had these lines on a page and that they represented the sounds that came out their mouth. And I was having a go at doing that back for myself. And of course, I saw it again about 3 years later, couldn't read a word of it, had no idea what it was all about, but it looked amazing.
I bet.
And I think any parent will know that feeling as well, or any teacher would be when you see children just bringing stuff together and creating with it. That's how the world works. That's what we do. We play with ideas, we bring them together. That's what all of our guests have done so far. We had Manju coming in and blending recipes and foods from different cultures, traditions, time zones, times in history, that is. We had Rebecca talking about recycling different elements from different packaging, books and everything, cutting them up, putting them back in different orders. John doing exactly the same thing, but with people's actual words that have been spoken. And yourself as well, taking photos and reproducing them. But I guess you're not trying to make them lifelike, are you? You're trying to put a stamp on them.
Yeah, and I think there's something about that space in between what looks like reality and what is part dream. And I think I'm paraphrasing Thomas Hardy a little bit here. Of course, he was the big Wessex man, and Wessex is a fictitious place as well, isn't it? Which is part made up, part based in truth.
In Tom Hardy's view of it, I suppose. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's an interesting example of how someone's taken something that was real and then made it into this half real, half imagined place that he invites people to join in with. And I guess that's part of my inspiration, if I had to nail it down, is that, to create that kind of half real, half imagined, half dreamlike world that Thomas Hardy could produce would be, something that I'd aim for with the work that I produce, or that feeling that it creates in other people.
I've just realised, Sally, that essentially what you've given us is a get out of jail free card in a way, because we've had guests who've been here before giving their tips for how you go out and collect stories or cook a dish, etc. And what you're basically saying is you can do anything. just bring and do anything. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I think that's what's so exciting about art. There is so much with the technology now that we don't even know about, where that's going to have an impact on the way that work's produced. And you can see that in music and visual art particularly, and of course, film and other different mediums. But essentially, I think, I'm interested in the sort of live experience, I suppose, as well. So there's always an element of community, which again, I think, that sounds like it's intrinsic, isn't it, in storytelling, is that you're telling it
definitely
at least one person, if not more, and that they're letting you take you with them on a journey, and they sort of surrender the control to the storyteller in that way. And I think, if you're putting together some community-based art, then it's slightly different. Then it's there is that surrender, but there's also not necessarily one person leading. It's more about creating something together and not really knowing what's going to happen. So it's kind of taken that level of trust to a whole different level. And that's really scary for a lot of people,
Yeah.
Definitely, because it's sort of embarrassing. And I guess kids do it very happily or readily most of the time. They get that play is the place where that you create, and it's not shameful. But of course, once adults start trying to recreate that level of creativity, then it does come with a level of shame that a lot of people can't cope with. So, it takes a lot of work.
It can do.
Yeah.
It can do, yeah. But this is saying to me, maybe if people want to have a go at expressing what equality means to them, and maybe can't think of a subject for that. So, going out and painting a particular building that represents equality to them, or maybe a person or a shape or color or whatever, maybe just producing art with other people, maybe others in your family, doing something online through Zoom, maybe with a choir, or it'd be really interesting to see something that's like Zoom painting by numbers or something like that, wouldn't it?
I mean, I can show you some of my Zoom little sketches that I've done.
Yes.
Not as lifelike as this is one of my favorite, because I think I used coffee as the medium.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was a very spontaneous one. So and again, it feels a bit sort of uncomfortable sometimes showing you the things that don't always work out. But you just kind of we sit and we draw each other. My friends and I, particularly at the beginning of lockdown, when it was very, nobody really knew what was going on, did we? This is just some very random examples of things that I've got around me to show that you can just do anything. What I was thinking about actually was, looking back 1,000 years ago to Anglo-Saxon times and looking at the art that they were producing then. And a lot of it came out of the monasteries and nunneries, because they had access to the resources that you needed, which is, I guess, I'm not an expert, so I won't pretend to be, but I know that they were involved in producing those illustrated or illuminated images to go in books and charters and things. So it's just interesting to think that they created those monasteries and nunneries as safe places where art could take place uninterrupted in a way. So that was like a protective situation for people to create art in as well. So that's
There was a lot of art from the people as well, but you can tell the difference because it's scratching, essentially. A lot of the art that they did, they would scratch into the tools that they were using, or the wood that they were using to build. So obviously that does put some limits on how lifelike they can be. Obviously it puts a limit on the alphabet as well. This is one of the reasons why runes look the way they do. They're mostly straight lines, because they're being carved out. But the fact was that people had this innate urge to be creative and just put their stamp on things, and any way you do that is expressing yourself. It is adding to the collective store that humanity is building up, which is tracking this progress towards equality for all.
So precious now.
Oh, sorry, what were you going to say there?
Everything that was created then is just so precious now.
Yes.
In the British Library, and I just think you don't know, do you, the value of something, unless you've had 1,000 years, you just don't know.
Exactly. But anybody watching this could do that. They could create something, maybe a doodle on a napkin, or a carving in their desk or something like that, and in 1,000 years time that could be in a museum.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you are watching this and you have a question for Sally, because maybe you want to spend some time honing a skill that you have, or you want to ask Sally a question about materials or particular kinds of inspiration, do make sure that you pop in here in the Zoom room. If you are here right now, remember to get a question to us, please type it into the chat box, and that's the only way that we can see it. And then we'll put those questions to Sally in just a moment. But my question for you, Sally, relates to something you have already mentioned, that you're a Kentish girl.
Oh, yeah.
And you worked with a hospital in Canterbury?
Yes, but it wasn't just any old hospital. It was a it was a pilgrims hospital. So it was the Dominican friars, who are, I think, people know the Franciscans. So all to do with the colour, isn't it, of the robes, which I'm going to completely get wrong if I try and say which is.
And I'm not going to be able to correct you if you do, so don't worry about it.
I want to avoid all the faux pas that come with that. So yes, obviously in Canterbury being a big pilgrimage centre, the different monastic sects or groups came over, didn't they, right back after St Augustine. So this is going back to 597, around that time, and all set up their various different abbeys and got money from different kings and noblemen at the time to set themselves up, and a lot of them are still there. Essentially they probably spent a bit of money doing up their buildings, but a lot of that space around Canterbury is completely from the time of the Anglo-Saxons and before, built on top of the Roman foundations as well. So yeah, I went in and did a show in one of the old Pilgrims hospitals, which is in Canterbury High Street, and that was around it was a show that celebrated modern day pilgrimage, without particularly thinking of any particular religion, because obviously pilgrimage is something that all religions, I think, probably have as part of their ways of celebrating and praying. So yeah, it was a collaborative show again, as most of my work is, and so we brought in a woman who was a specialist in medieval music, and she put on a little show one evening, which was really interesting. What a character! And then we had some slides from somebody that had gone across. I think it's from Canterbury to Rome on horseback. So she'd taken written a book about it and spoke about her journey and the writing of that book. Fascinating story, two sisters, and of course it was part of their grief process as well. I think they'd had a bereavement, and I think that was, so a lot of people can relate to pilgrimage. I don't know if you've ever come across, there's quite a lot of work around movement in art, particularly in performance art and land art, where people are moving along roads, and I think it's so ingrained into the psyche. This is me just sort of going off piste a little bit here, but and so to have one of these wonderful old buildings that was on the old original pilgrim site to show the work seemed really, lucky and special, and they were very, very helpful. Yeah, that was 2009. I'm just thinking if I've got the flyers, I'll put it up. But yeah, we had a calligrapher as well, and yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because I come from Canterbury, you see, so that's where my love of all things history and medieval started, going around, the medieval streets, let alone things like Canterbury Tales. But that sounds like an incredible project. And again, you say it's about movement, and there's an awful lot of movement in art, but what we do is we try and capture a moment, and it's impossible to do in reality. Time is always moving, it never stops. But with art we can take a piece of it, set it down, and go back to it and explore it whenever. It's a really solid way of looking at memories, isn't it?
I think so. And a lot of the work that people produce, if you look at a lot of artists, then quite often they're dealing with the same subject matter over and over and keep coming back to it. And you see that with, career artists that have done lots of work over time, which has been shared, that have been lucky enough to get that sort of exposure. It's those sort of recurring ideas and images that's what that I find really interesting. So my advice, if that's what we're asking for, would always be just to get it down, and don't ever throw anything away. Don't ever throw anything away.
That's very contrary to a lot of popular wisdom that's going on at the moment, isn't it?
I think if it comes out of your hand, just follow your hand and hold on to it, because you can always go back, and things always come back, I think, as well, once you put it out there.
Well, speaking of things coming back, we do actually have someone back in the Zoom room who has appeared in a previous episode, but I gather she's a friend of yours as well. So I'm going to see if I can bring Manju into the screen with us. There we go. I'm suddenly really, really small. Hello, Manju.
So big. Yeah.
Have you been listening to all that we've been discussing, Manju?
Yeah, it's been fascinating and eye-opening, and I've got some tips now, and I'm going to get sketching, actually, and I've got some ideas with papier-mâché as well. So it's been really brilliant. I've enjoyed it.
Would you combine, because obviously for those who missed episode 1, you're a chef, and would you combine any of Sally's ideas with food, I guess, with cooking?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was thinking of making a meal out of papier-mâché so everyone could see what it would look like.
Oh, wow.
So I'd make the breads and the fruits and the salad and everything and see if that would work, and create a plate of papier-mâché food.
We can make it really big or really small. You can play with the scale and the colours. Yeah.
Almost like Play-Doh or clay, or I could do that.
It's very Anglo-Saxon to do that as well. If we're trying to celebrate equality, 1,000 years of it, by thinking what they would have done 1,000 years ago, of course they would have been using earthy tones, because they were grabbing things from the earth, including, I'm sure, a lot of the berries and stuff. So creating paints out of them. That's a wonderful idea. So that's going to be the cover of your next book, is it, Manju?
Yeah, I'd love it to be. Or maybe a sketch of some food or something, very simple, classic. And there are books, cookbooks, that have sketches instead of photographs. So it carries on. And they're amazing amazing sketches of various dishes. And they look so good and tasty.
And it's a brilliant reminder that art comes in all sorts of forms, because if you think of it, as we've said a few times today, it's a capturing of a moment, it's a form of expression. You grab what you have around you. That could be some ingredients, it could be some balloons. I mean, who came up with papier-mâché in the first place? The crazy notion of sticking, bits of newspaper in glue is what I remember it being from school, and then you slap it on a balloon and you pop the balloon later. It's as crazy as the idea of how on earth was bread invented.
Exactly.
So fantastic ideas. Well, I'm really pleased you are here, Manju, because we had Mary from Youth for Human Rights International with us last week, who also brought in some wonderful examples of art, a lot of art that children had produced to show equality. And some of the ideas there were around people of different races, people of different abilities, all in the one picture, all produced by children who have immensely more artistic talent than me when it comes to pencils and paper, although I'm inspired by Sally now as well. I think, if it's just a representation, that's all it needs to be, isn't it?
Me too.
And we're encouraging everybody who feels creative after watching one of these episodes to get in the kitchen and cook, or get out some canvas, or what was it, chalk, start sculpting, chipping away at your little bits of chalk, creating anything to just show that you can have a go, you're willing to have a go. That in itself is a sign of the equality, the equal opportunity that is open to us today. Create something like that and post it up on kingdom1000.com. Not only then will you be taking part in this fantastic celebration, but as we said with Mary last week, there is a book coming out that collects lots of the stories from Kingdom 1000. It has a few other stories in there as well, a lot of the history, and it's written for all ages to be able to enjoy it. So all the way down to about 7. So it's very well researched, but it's all the way down to the age of 7. Could pick it up, read it, or have it read to or read with. We've got we had a bit of a public request last week as to how many of those we should give away, and we were advised to give away 5. So that is exactly what we'll be doing. We'll be giving away 5 of those books, as well as some wonderful cookbooks that have been donated by Manju.
Absolutely. And here's one
you
of
got
them.
oh, excellent. We love the word easy in that title.
Yes, very, very easy. Again, from 7 onwards, I would say.
Brilliant.
And I'll be giving a couple of those away. And if anybody wants more, let me know.
Oh, wonderful.
Recommend.
Well, there you go. Again, in the comments, folks, if you think we should give away more than 2, do put in the comments. Like Mary said last week, this is equal opportunities. This is a democracy. Are you going to be able to sign them for us as well, Manju?
Yes, I will. Definitely. Absolutely.
And I think you're like me.
Artistic way.
Yes. Well, what I'm hoping to do is actually get a signature from everyone who has been on Kingdom 1000 in the Kingdom 1000 book. The title of the book is Who Made England? There's a nice white open space on the first couple of pages where I think we'll be able to get all 13 guests' signatures in there. Be interesting how we're going to get those from America, but we'll find a way. So what you'll be winning is not just a book, but a little thank you autograph from everybody who has been involved in this project. And just to make it absolutely clear, this is not a meritocratic competition. The way you enter is just by posting something that you have made up on kingdom1000.com. Because as Sally has been saying here, as all our guests have been saying really, art is an equal opportunities activity. Just by opening your mouth and making a sound, you are creating. So maybe record a little sound clip or a video clip of you talking about what equality means to you, or having a go at telling one of the stories that you've heard here, or telling a story that you have heard from someone else in your family or something like that. Have a go at creating a picture from a photo, or even just taking a photo. There are all sorts of ways of getting creative and showing us what equality means to you. Put it up on Kingdom 1000 and it will be entirely at random who gets those wonderful prizes, but you have to create something and put it up there in order to be in it. So please do go up there and do that. It's really easy to do. kingdom1000.com and click on get involved. Sally, will you be able to put some artwork up there as well? Some of the things that you've been showing us today so that people can go back to it?
Absolutely, yes. I'll put some stuff up so hopefully people can feel inspired to have a go. And I think I absolutely echo what you say in that you've got to bring your work to the audience and just let yourself be out there, and don't worry really, because it's you, and that's as important as anyone else's work, you know. Particularly at the moment with Instagram, you get all this instant feedback, and you know, it can be very off-putting, I think. So it's just to be really clear that it doesn't matter. That's just other people's stuff. It's their business and not yours. So.
That's right. Yeah, we're not going to be doing. I don't think there even is the capability on the website for people to like or comment, and that is deliberate. It's because it is just a showcase of the amazing things that everyone can produce. And again, if you want tips on that, join us in this program, and you can ask our wonderful guests here in the Zoom room. I don't think anybody who's here with us at the moment, I can see that we have people here, but again, they are being fairly quiet at the moment. Manju, though, we've brought you forward. Do you have a question for Sally?
Yes, I suppose if I wanted to start sketching, is there any special paper or pencils I would need? Or can I just buy something from the pound shop?
Oh, well, the pound shops are brilliant. I mean, I must admit, I do think you can get it's a great way to get working, and cheaply, and just give yourself those, get yourself a little present, isn't it? Quite often, I think, the biggest gift you can give yourself as an artist is the time, as to start off with. So quite often, people are busy and they don't allow themselves time to do anything, and particularly if you've got an idea of having to be of a certain level and you don't hit that level, it can, you've got to give yourself a bit of forgiveness as well. So those are two things that I'd show up with if I was starting sketching, is time and forgiveness for yourself if it doesn't work out the way that you think it ought to. Definitely,
and those are free as well, aren't they?
Free. You think they had a great price, but the pens and the paper, pound shop. Yeah, whatever you can get your hands on, really. And if you can get the good stuff, that's great too.
Like what kind of pencil? Is it sort of 2B, HB, anything in particular? Or?
I think again, those different. It's good to test things out. So if you do get the chance to try a different range, because each of the weight and thicknesses of pencil and the grades of can really help you to create a mood. So if you really want to go for heavy and dark and get some emotion out there, then it's good to go for the 4B, 6B. But if you want to be really quiet and very it's slightly withdrawn, and that can have a very different atmosphere, is go for the 6H. I've seen some amazing work. I've got a friend who only works in 6H, and so you have to really look at something to find out what she's created. And to me, it's like the antithesis of the way I work, but it really it's so powerful by being so quiet. So I'd say explore all the different options, and don't be afraid if you don't know how to do something, because the whole point, I mean, when I went to art college, they were really clear that they didn't want to teach you how, because you find out your way of doing things. You create your own way, and it's probably a bit like creating food, isn't it? There's a recipe, you can follow the recipe, or you can go slightly off the recipe and you're creating something that's almost the same, but it's yours now. Same with art, really. Yeah, there's
always like that for me. I can try following a recipe and it will still be very different to what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
You can get some curry paste as well, though, Manju, and just dip your fingers in and use that to create your art.
You can do. Be a bit smelly and oily, but it'll look lovely. It'll look beautiful.
Yeah. Definitely, yes.
Thank you ever so much for joining us, both of you. It's been wonderful having you back with us, Manju, especially in an episode with no gremlins.
Yeah.
There you go. Despite the weather outside, it must have blown them all away, which has been wonderful. We are going to be back again next week with, another type of art, which is not one that I think you mentioned, actually, Sally. We're going to be having, now I know she has another name for it, but I've always heard it called henna. So we're going to have a henna artist joining us to, again, I suppose that's equality through body art, isn't it? So that's Min, who we have joining us next week, and we are going to be having the story. Oh, we've got a wedding story as well, since Henna is something that is used in the days leading up to a wedding. So that's what you've got to look forward to next week. If you've got any interest in that, please do join us. And once again, we'll be exploring this rich and fantastic medieval world with some incredible artists like Sally here. Thank you ever so much for joining us, Sally. It's been wonderful having you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
We look forward to seeing what you can put up on the website to inspire people further. Thank you also to Yuliu, who has been our elf today, and to everybody who is here in the Zoom room with us or watching in all of those other places on Facebook, YouTube, the websites, etc. To Dave, who produced the wonderful illustrations to go with the story, Max, who cobbled that all together, everybody's been working on the captions, Emma and Paul, and all those working on the subtitles as I speak. There are, again, too many people to mention. This really is a labor of love from so many people. So thank you all. It only remains for us to say cheerio and see you next week. So cheerio and see you next week. Thank you again, Sally. Thank you again, Manju. Goodbye, everyone. See you again soon. I really need to